And I'm telling you this story because I think the whole issue of parenting and raising children is a function of something that was put in place in the middle 1940s. But the game has totally changed since 1991, Christmas of 1991. Smart Money
Parenting. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Smart Money Parenting. We have a very special guest today. His name is the great Dan Sullivan. Mm-hmm. He has been a mentor to Chad and I for many years. And he has not only 10 to 100x our businesses, he's helped us gain freedom of time, money, relationships, and purpose through the strategic coach method. And how long have you been coaching now?
In 2024, it'll be 50 years.
50 years.
Yeah, this is my 49th year right now.
And over 20,000 entrepreneurs coached by Dan. Everyone I know who's done it. There's some people here who've been coached by Dan for over 30 years.
And I got to say something, Dan. You just said something at the end of our day today with our free zone group. This was 55 or so of the top entrepreneurs in the world. And you said something at the very end that struck me. You said, I'm 79. You're 79 years old right now. You said, I've done more since 70 than everything I did before it. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, I think, is a powerful thing to talk about for families. I think a lot of families think about this idea of just got to get the kids off to college and then I can hang up the hat. Or I just got to get to retirement and I can then hang up the hat. You've done more in the last 9 years than
I had in the previous 70.
Mm-hmm. And you've probably done more in the last 9 years than any young person I've seen. Mm-hmm. Like, it's incredible, the energy, the vibrance. So let's talk about that for a second. Why is that your thinking? How are you on fire at 79 years old?
Well, I think, first of all, that I have a role model. My father had his best business year when he was 82. And he started off as a farmer, and that didn't work. And then he, in his 50s, he switched careers and he became a landscaper. Small town, mostly lawn work. But it was kind of a role model for me that he reinvented himself. And I thought that was terrific. And the other thing is that he was really busy right up through year 82, and then he said that's enough, and he quit. And his 83rd birthday, which was in December, and he died 9 months later of prostate cancer.
Wow.
And my feeling is that the day that my father didn't go to work, he didn't know who he was, and you want to be off the planet if you don't know who you are. So my sense is that I in a friendly way, I want to surpass his 82-year mark, but I drew a real lesson about dying 9 months after you quit.
Right.
And so I said, I'm going to be working, there comes a point where you exit, and I'm going to be working when I do that. But I was thinking about your project here and the question, and I think your timing is extraordinarily good right now, because I think the issues that you're dealing with in all three things, this podcast being one of your products, and then each of you has a book out, and I got your book today. The
Value Creation Kid, Smart Not Spoiled for Chad.
Yeah, yep. And then the Gravystack, and I think the timing is extraordinarily right for this, because I think there is a crisis in parenting, and I think there's a crisis in certainly the younger generation right now. The incidence of observable mental crises is very, very high right now. One is that it's being observed now, and I don't know in previous times whether there was a similar crisis in being a young person. I know there wasn't with me, so I was born I was born in 1944, so I was born 2 weeks before the Normandy invasion. And I was born 6 weeks before the Bretton Woods Agreement, and a lot of history really isn't taught today the way it was taught when I was going to grade school and high school. But the Bretton Woods Agreement was basically how the U.S. and 43 other countries planned for the reconstruction of the world after the Second World War. And basically, we lived in what was discussed over about a 3 or 4 day period. We've lived in the outcome of that meeting for right up until now. And essentially, the U.S. was the only one left standing. That was a big country. And they had no war damage. The United States had no war damage, and but they ruled supreme. I mean, they had 50 in 1945. They had 50% of the global economy was U.S., and they had massive amounts of money. They had massive amounts of reserves, and so what they proposed was not an economic deal. It was really a security deal. That they knew that Americans would not be for the war continuing in any way. The U.S. were tired of war, and they had paid a money cost, but they had paid, there was a 250,000 dead as a result of the war. And they basically put together an agreement, and Peter Zion, who I'm a great fan of, who's a geopolitics expert, he points out that the U.S. basically did not want to hit the Soviet Union head on, so they created essentially a prosperity curtain around the Soviet Union. And they did this by endless loaning and outright grants for countries to rebuild their economies and then start shipping their products, and they could ship them to the United States with no tariffs. Okay. And the U.S. military would protect all the trade routes, and that deal's been in place since 1945, and it made sense as long as there was a Soviet Union. And I'm telling you this story because I think the whole issue of parenting and raising children is a function of something that was put in place in the middle 1940s. But the game has totally changed. Since 1991, Christmas of 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed.
Right.
Yep.
Well, it collapsed before that. It collapsed, but the communism, the actual Soviet Union and communism, the Communist Party was outlawed in Russia in the early years. It came back. And so what I want to say, and this was a very artificial world. I mean, when you think about the last 77 years, it's a very artificial world. You've never had one country basically serving as supervisory adult for the whole world.
Right.
And that's
America was the parent.
And what I'm saying is that it actually stopped a lot of things, and it kind of created an unnatural atmosphere. Now, I know this stuff because that's been my entire life. It's 77 years, and I've lived 79 of these years. So my whole life has been lived within this. And the biggest thing I noticed, because I grew up on a farm in the 40s and 50s, and children were an asset. You couldn't have a farm without children.
You needed them, right?
To work everything.
It was free labor.
That's true.
Yeah, that's right.
And I can remember, as soon as you could walk, you were given tasks, and the the financial security of the family was dependent upon everybody doing their tasks and being in basic teamwork with the other kids. And there were 7 of us. But what happened as a result is, first of all, it was the end of our generation was really the end of the big farm family communities. Okay. And I think that the whole relationship of children to parents began to change, and there was a lot of movement to the cities,
right.
And there's no use for your children in the cities for the most part. I mean, maybe they go from being an asset to being an expense.
A liability almost.
Yeah. I mean,
Interesting.
They're expensive, and people say, and they have to measure the education of their children and everything in a cost-benefit analysis and everything like that. And I think the children are, they're very conscious of this, that they're an expense. Okay. But the other thing was that I think that there was always discussions about money on the farm. I mean, you knew what things cost. You knew why the savings had to happen. And I think that we had a better education of basic math and basic finances when we were on the farm. So.
Yeah, you had to.
Why do you think it's so critical that parents talk about money to kids these days? What difference does it make, do you think, when kids grow up with understanding some aspects of personal finance and having that foundation?
Well, I think that, as an employer, all three of us own our own companies and we're employers. And you might as well tell your employees how much money the company makes and how much money you make, because otherwise they'll just make it up. And I think children do the same thing about their parents. That you may not give them the information, but that doesn't mean they don't have an assessment in their mind of how much
money they live by.
Guess they're living by. So you should actually, if they're going to be guessing, you might as well give them accurate information.
That's good.
Actually,
I love that take.
But I think it's about anything that the parents are doing. They should discuss it with their children, because their children are sensing something isn't quite right, and they'll just make up a story about why that is, and then they'll share it with everybody else on social media.
That's right.
So I said the more accurate and the more fully you inform your children, the less chance you have of misunderstanding.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
You're exactly right about kids potentially feeling like an expense more than an asset nowadays.
Yeah.
Every year it comes out. What's the cost of raising a kid?
I see the
It's
articles.
the top on Forbes every year.
Articles,
it was $317,000.
Yeah.
It was last month what it put out.
Yeah.
And now kids see they see that parents talk that way. Do you know how much this costs? We can't afford this.
Yeah.
You know how money doesn't grow on trees.
Well, and there's the whole thing, what kind of sacrifice we're making so that you can do this and everything like that.
Right.
And it comes from, first of all, I think we've had, 4 generations of parents since I was a kid, And I think what's happened is that parents are badly trained. If the kids are being badly trained now, guess what? The bad training started about 4 generations ago. And I think it was the 60s that did things in their
The 60s were the beginning of the end.
Oh, the 60s was it was a disaster zone. You had 3 major figures assassinated.
Yeah.
The prosperity of the United States, which was overwhelming. The competition now from the countries that the U.S. had put back on their feet now, the Europeans, Japan, and everything else, and they were taking jobs away. Jobs were the movement of sending jobs overseas where they had lower labor costs, gutted cities. I mean, I grew up in northern Ohio, which is a big industrial state, and the big 3 were there, and none of the big three factories, Chrysler, Ford, and GM, they're gone. The steel mills were gone. And, it's just, and so I think that the 60s, and they also introduced a lot of political strife. As a matter of fact, I think the present leadership of one of the political parties in the United States were all formed as the student rebellions in the 1960s. They're in their 70s and 80s now.
Yeah.
And they're now the senior leadership. And it's very interesting that we're having riots again. It's very interesting that things are burned down again, that there's protests, because they learned this stuff when they were 17, 18 years old. Now they're in their 70s and 80s.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
When you talk about the timing of Gravystack and changing financial education and assisting parents in this endeavor, why do you think now is the time for this really to be?
Well, I think there's a real crisis because we're now starting to hear messages in the public media. Again, it's on one side of the political spectrum that parents don't really own their children. Society owns their children. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, I mean, you are so far off the main line now when you start talking. And it shows up in the school boards. I think that COVID was very beneficial for two reasons, and it has to do with children and parents. Children finally found out what their parents actually do for a living because it was mostly on Zoom.
Yeah, working from home.
Yeah,
working from home.
Yeah,
and parents finally discovered what their children were being taught at school.
Yeah,
Taught at school.
That's true.
And it's created,
not being taught.
Well, I think it's created one of the most significant political uprisings that I have witnessed in my entire American lifetime, and that is the local parents who are overturning school boards.
Wow.
Mostly the mothers.
Right.
Mostly the mothers are doing it, and I'm all for it.
Yeah.
You know,
it's incredible. I mean,
don't screw around with mothers in relationship to their children.
That's right.
Mama Bear's coming out in force.
They will fight for their children.
Yeah.
I mean,
it doesn't even matter what their political beliefs are, but they'll fight for their children.
That's right.
And
that's right.
That's an interesting perspective on this, because I think a lot of parents said COVID was a disaster for my kid, but now a lot of people, I think, are waking up to what's most critical for my kid.
I think you're benefiting with the Gravystack and with the podcast and with the books. I think you're benefiting from a sudden huge opening in the marketplace for people wanting to think more deeply about things that have gone, I think, significantly off track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've always said, I mean, in the book that Lee Benson and I have, the main thing was education should be based on its ability to create value in the world.
Yeah.
Its practical ability to create value for you and others around you. And we skip that so often.
Yeah.
We go into complex and theoretical and things that are just
memorizing facts for a test.
In one ear, out the other.
And memorize our facts.
And we skip the practicality. We skip financial competency altogether. We skip a lot of the principles of value creation. We skip so many things that just feel like are step one when you leave the house. Mm-hmm. And we move into other things thinking that they'll get it somewhere else. Parents think that schools are doing it, and schools think that parents are doing it. And the banks aren't doing a thing because they don't care about kids, because kids have no money. Mm-hmm. So we really, I think there's a huge hole.
Oh, yeah.
And we're trying our best to fill this.
And nature and other things abhors a vacuum. So I think that you're filling in. But the moment that you talked about it, it's, a couple of years in the past when you first brought up the idea. And Chad, I had talked to you even before the collaboration happened here. And I knew how family committed you were and family oriented you were. And, Babs and I don't have children. And but we both grew up in big families, so we have the experience of life in big families. And but I think that it's going to be the issue that you're introducing, or the issues that you're directly addressing in all three of your knowledge products is, I think, probably number one, number two on the election policy.
Interesting.
For one of the parties.
Yeah.
For one of the parties in the 2024 election. I can see it coming.
Yeah.
You can just feel it.
We found ourselves in a hotbed without realizing it.
Well,
we're excited for it.
Well, you're going against some very, very elite establishment bad beliefs right here, and that children should be left to educate themselves. Children can't educate themselves.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think what you said, Dan, really struck me is during that pandemic time where people were stuck at home and really questioning what's going on and all these disruptive changes, most parents decided to take back control of educating their kids in some way. They said, you know what, enough's enough. Like, This is a time that where everyone is kind of scared and panicked. Stress is high. My kids are suffering. What really matters? What do I need to teach them? How do I prepare them for all the what ifs? And how can I make sure that my kids are prepared to succeed in the real world? And I think that's what we're trying to bring is...
and you're providing massive tools.
You're
providing massive tools. You're a structure and, I think one of the most interesting discoveries you both had, you thought this was for kids, but it's turning out to be about...
That's it.
It's actually turning out
the parents.
And I said, always go for the parents. Go for the check writer.
And there you go. Smart money parenting.
People say, you should do the children's market. And I said, no, I go for the big check writers.
That's right. That's great. And the parents need to know this stuff too. That's
and a lot of parents are abysmally ignorant of basic finances.
Yep.
I mean, the debt loads wouldn't be there if they knew anything about finances and economics. But I'm going to, when the Gravystack comes out, I'm just going to spread the word. I mean, personally, as someone's committed to what you're doing, I'll do my utmost through my networks and through my channels to get it out there. And I'll get it to one of our clients is a U.S. Senator, and I'm going to get it right to the Capitol. He's on the correct side for being positive about your message. And but I think that... there's huge numbers of organizations out here would be willing to carry your message forward. They're committed to doing it, but they don't have the means. They're committed to do it. They don't have the tools. And I think you're providing tools for a market. I think you're providing tools that you may be surprised how big it is once it gets...
Well, I appreciate
some traction.
We appreciate
that. I think you're going to be quite amazed by this. I think this is going to be seen as a central cultural phenomenon.
I hope so.
Thank you.
What's great is anyone Scott and I talk to, they're behind the mission.
100%.
Every people in any industry, they say, "How can I help support this?"
And why hasn't this been created before?
Yeah, I wish I had this when my kids were young, but I want to help get this word out.
Yeah.
And I think with all that support from the ground roots, like we made the number 2 podcast in the category of family and parenting. We didn't spend a penny.
Yeah.
Right. Out of 20,000.
Yeah. Out of 20,000 podcasts in the space, we spent not a penny on marketing. We just asked people, we told them the mission and said, here's what we're focused on. Can you help spread the word? And it was like wildfire. And I think that's like what you're saying, Dan, is people recognize there's a need for this right now.
Yep.
Smart money parenting is an issue that everyone cares about, regardless of where you come from.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up here in a second, but there's something interesting I wanted you to mention real quick. The average kids of Strategic Coach clients is higher than the population average.
Oh, yeah.
So tell about that and why you think that is.
We do surveys of our entire client base every couple of years. And the most recent one, we added the question of how big is your family, not counting you and your spouse, but how big is the family? On average, it was 3.5 children. So people said, why do you think Strategic Coach entrepreneurs, because you're all entrepreneurs, why do you think that they have so many kids? And I said, well, two of the benefits of being in the program is a lot of free time and a lot of money. And,
that's good.
That's great.
I've had free time, but you put the two together in the right circumstances, and you end up with a lot of kids.
That's true. That's great. That's great.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
But I think that I was talking to one of the other clients, Mark Young, today, who's very, very big in the political realm. He's got a very big voice, and he says, I think we've gone too far down the road. And I said, no. I said, it'll turn in a moment. There'll be an incident, and it'll be something that happens. It'll be within the United States, and something will happen, and all of a sudden, just like that, it'll be a flip. It'll just go like that. And we got a little indication of that with the Bud Light beer commercial. Well, it wasn't a commercial. They just put somebody's name on, a particular persons on a can, and Budweiser. I mean, Budweiser is about as deeply cultural as you can.
It's been a staple of every Super Bowl.
The Clydesdales, everything like that. And this was red, white, and blue. This is 4th of July, and everything else. And the other side decided just to fool around with that. I mean, what's really funny, you can tell which side is ascending because all the humor is on that side. There's no humor on the other side, except the other side itself. That's the sort of the humor.
You know who's winning based on the humor.
Oh yeah. You can always tell.
Interesting.
Whoever is telling the joke is feeling optimism, and whoever doesn't think anything's funny is very pessimistic. And so my sense is, I really pay attention to comedians. And you get people like Dave Chappelle, and I think Dave Chappelle is one of the most amazing,
he's hilarious,
amazing comedians that I think I've seen in my entire life.
He's not PG or G, but he's still really funny.
No, but he's really, really funny. And so what I think is that we're on the threshold right now, and it's a cultural shift because you're dealing with economics, but it's really the cultural attitudes determine how money is viewed.
Yeah.
Okay. And my sense is that savings always beats debt.
Yeah.
And budgeting properly and growing wealth is a sign of a dependable person. It's people that you can count on. And and I think the way in which you've done it through games to a population that is the most gifted gaming population in the history of the world is, you're just riding the horses in the direction they're actually going.
That's the smart way to ride the horse.
That's the best way to ride the horse.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Anyway, so I just want to compliment you both on this endeavor. And it was a big guess that you made, and it's a big bet that you made. But I think it's going to be a huge payoff that you're going to get out of this.
A huge impact, for sure.
And I think, first of all, I think it's going to be enormously successful. But I think it's for both of you, it's going to be extraordinarily gratifying.
Yeah,
I agree.
And this goes without saying, but you're one of the main catalysts of this. This is a free zone collaboration for Strategic Coach.
Yeah.
So just want to thank you for that. This has been
bringing us together.
Powerful thing.
Dan, you brought us together.
Yeah,
so thank you.
So Dan Sullivan, thank you so much again. Thanks guys for listening. Share this episode with anybody else you want to share it with. And thanks for listening, watching, viewing, and subscribing. See you next time.
Thank you guys.
It's more than money if you want to succeed. You gotta know what to do with it. You gotta take the lead. You gotta give them confidence. You gotta make them smart. If your kids are gonna thrive, now's the time to start. Smart money.